So in your swatches panel, you will see that there is a selection of grayscale right here. And it goes from 100% black down to 5%. And what we're going to do is use a grayscale to actually create our image. First thing I like to do is, because I'm just like a bigger visual, I like to go and set my thumbnails to medium. A little bolder, a little more there to see. And now I'm going to go visit my library, the patterns, and we're going to take a look at some of the offerings that Illustrator provides for us. So if we take a look at basic graphic dots, what we see is a selection, again, that is grayscale oriented. Here's a 90%, over here's a 50%, and down here's a 10%. And we can use these to fill in our pictures to create our grayscale portrait. Now these are pretty regulated, regimented. The decision essentially as to what is 90% has already been made for you. So let's see if we've got some more interesting ones. Let's go back down to patterns, and let's take a look at some of our decorative patterns. I have a set called Vonster, and you should too. And here you will see a selection of fancy, detailed, textural patterns. The one I'm interested in is called Jive. So I'd like Jive to appear, so I click on it and it shows up over here in my swatches panel. Now remember, we're working in grayscale, and I would like this particular pattern to be part of my selection, but it has to be in grayscale, so I have to change the color. By double-clicking on Jive in my swatches panel, the pattern options are brought up, and we go into what we call isolation mode. And pattern options here now, I can go in and I can edit. I can select this part of the pattern, tell it to go to gray. All right, let's go a little darker. And then I could pick another selection and say, okay, well, you need to be changed out also, so that we have both items in gray. All right, and you can see that. Here's a little preview over here. And you can see that this is creating what I would probably estimate like a 60% of gray. Again, I'm estimating, I'm approximating, I'm using my grayscale here to kind of give me an idea of what this is going to create for me. When I am happy, I am going to name it Jive Gray. All right, I'm going to save a copy of it. Oops, well, apparently I need to name it Jive Gray here too also. Okay. You'll see that it appears up here, and now what I'm going to say is cancel. That way I've preserved my original Jive, and I've got Jive Gray here. Oh, I misnamed that. Let's go back and fix that so we don't have terrible problems with that. There we go. So we have Jive and Jive Gray. All right, let's get out of there. We're back to our scale here, and like I said, I was thinking this is about a 60, so let's go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, click on it, apply. I have part of my grayscale started. Now, let's take a look again at the original picture that I'm going to be using. As I look at this image, there are different textures to the picture. I see her dress and I see sort of some lines to it. I see her skin and I see potentially some mezzotint look to it, which is a pattern that I will share with you shortly. And then when I look at her hair, I see a lot of curling and waving. And so I'm thinking my darker shades, like the dress and her hair, are the ones that I want to have a particular pattern for. So for her hair, I definitely want this sort of pattern. So I'm going to have to take this pattern and make it even darker. And then for her dress, which I feel is the darkest piece of the art, I'm going to take and make a dark striped pattern for my very last box here. So let's turn her back off and let's go up here to this square and let's get a pattern for that. So let's see, we're going to go in here. We're going to go back to our patterns. We have our basic graphics. I'm going to go and see what lines has to offer me. So I bring up my lines and I can see, there are some very dark lines here. Now I'd like my lines to go in the other direction. The way we're going to do that, again, is to customize this line pattern. All right, so we're going to close this. I'm going to double click and I'm going to simply select and rotate this work. Now holding down my shift key on the keyboard will allow it to move in 45-degree angles. And that way you'll get very straight lines. So here we are, we now have vertical lines. All right, it's a 90%. We're going to save a copy. We're going to name this 90% vertical. Put lines in there if you want or not. Say okay. Say okay. There it is. There's the original. Again, we say cancel, which defies all logic. And we go back and using our selection tool, we can change out to our vertical line pattern that we just created. All right, so this is going to be applied to the dress. The next darkest area is her hair. And so I'm going to want to get this monster pattern, but an even darker level of that. So I have to think about how can I achieve that. And using my appearance menu, what I'm thinking is I will apply to this square the fanciful jive gray, but then I will make another fill, and this fill will not be jive gray, but will be a solid dark gray background. And if we look, you can see how I've created an 80%. It's a little dark. I'm going to actually back it off just a little bit. So that it does look different in its depth. So now we've got an 80% here. We need to fill in all the rest of these. So I'm going to do another swirl copy. And in this square, again, I'm going to use my jive gray. And I'm going to add another fill. And this one's going to be an even lighter gray. And that way I have some range to give her hair some depth. Now I'm going to start working from the other direction. What's my lightest light? And again, I can go back and I can refer to my picture. I have curly hair. I have highlights of curly hair. And now I'm going to work from the right to the left and go, what's my lightest? Now, if we go pure white, let's do that. You're going to see that that pure white is brighter than the lightest part of her skin. So I can either choose to push her skin even lighter than it is, or let's use a really faint dot pattern. So I'm going to again go up to my swatches, go out to my books, patterns. Let's see, we got lines, textures, dots. Let's go into the dots and choose a really light dot. All right. And as we look at that, we can see that it doesn't have a background of white, which won't be a problem on a white sheet of paper, but right now we just can't. We see it with the gray background of the picture. All right, my next one, I want to take a look at those mezzotints that I had hinted at earlier. So let's go in and take a look at the textures area. These are very traditional textures and they're called mezzotints. You might be familiar with them more from composition books. A lot of times composition books will use this mezzotint on the front covers of the books. When I look at her skin, and I'm looking at sort of the medium gray color, which I would put right about there, I am seeing that there is a texture, but it's irregular. Okay, so I choose a mezzotint. Now again, going back to my layers, I'm going to unlock the picture just temporarily so that I can pick it up and move it from behind the grayscale. There we go. All right. This is appearing now too dark. Look at the jump between those two. So I'm going to take this particular pattern, and I don't want to change the corner radius. That's what it keeps wanting me to do. And I'm going to swap these. Swap them. There we go. So there's a range for hair. Here's kind of her skin. Let's go a little bit darker. Add just a slightly darker than that. Perhaps this, or maybe this mezzotint. No, not quite dark enough. Let's see how that looks. Okay, now we have to fill in between here and there. And again, we're looking at what are we going to be using these colors for? So I am seeing that I'm going to be using them on her throat. I'm going to be using some of these lighter colors around her eyes for highlights, on her collarbones, her shoulder. So they're not the inorganic, they are the organic. So I feel like they shouldn't be quite as regimented, a little freer. So I'm going to try some of the different options that I have. Maybe that one there. Maybe this one could be slightly darker. And again, if I'm looking at it and it's not quite getting dark enough, I can double up on my patterns again. Don't forget we can do that in the appearance menu. I can put a second fill. And on that second fill, I could choose to add some additional dots if I wanted to. So let me see. I'm feeling like we need a little more dots there. And now it's a little darker, sitting right in between the two. This one seems to be still a little dark. So I'm going to go back to, we're going to have to go get them, the dots, pattern, dots, and see if we can get an even lighter one. Is that the lightest we've got? There we go. That looks even more spaced out. And then a pure white. So now I have my scale built, 0 to 100. I've got the darkest here being the shirt, then her hair, then we get into her lips, which I may or may not like this texture, this pattern that I have chosen for her lips, but we will see. And now I'm ready to actually start drawing and filling my forms in to create the actual portrait. I'm going to have the picture a little bit off from center, just because I like asymmetrical a little bit better. It's a personal thing. And right now I'm going to go back to my layers and lock that layer. I have my grayscale on a layer, and I can begin by getting my pencil tool. It's under my shaper tool.